Okay.
So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for attending this panel. When I first got the topic, I read down and out in Shanghai and Shenzhen. In the beginning, I was a little confused. I was talking to my fellow panelists. I'm like, what do they mean? Then I realized these two cities, Shanghai and Shenzhen, are really at the forefront of China's entrepreneurial push, given that this drive for entrepreneurship in China really comes from the top of the government. We know that Premier Li Keqiang came up with this very popular slogan in Chinese. It says, 大众创业,万众创新. In English, it means mass entrepreneurship and innovation. So therefore, today we're going to be talking about why Shanghai and Shenzhen became two of the most popular and successful cities when it comes to pushing for entrepreneurship, especially Shenzhen. I think it's the most innovative and youngest city in China now. Now, my first question I want to ask Edith, because I was talking to her, she told me that she was born in Hong Kong. I sort of grew up in both Beijing and Hong Kong, so you have this ability to bridge differences and cultural understandings between mainland and Hong Kong. What's very interesting is that, to me, Hong Kong really is one of the first international cities in China, and then also Hong Kong perhaps is the most open international big cities in China as well. But in recent decades, especially perhaps for the past 10 to 15 years, Hong Kong sort of lagged behind when it comes to entrepreneurship, especially when it comes to technological push and development. It lags behind Shenzhen, lags behind Shanghai, and certainly a lot of U.S. cities as well. Can you tell us why is that? I know this is still a very big city. It's a great city. It's still the financial center in Asia, but the significance and competitiveness seems to be diminishing in recent years. Can you tell us why?
After hearing you say that, I want to cry.
I painted such a gloom and doom picture.
I'm born and raised in Hong Kong, and I obviously love Hong Kong, and I still, deep down in my heart, I think that we still have a chance. We shouldn't be just say, hey, because we're behind, this is not going to be forever. But having said that, as we talked about backstage, I think that my family, part of my family is in Beijing and Guangzhou, and I really think, like, fundamentally, as an investor, I think the most important is to start with the people, right? Yes. The entrepreneur. And I remember, like, when I was growing up, I would go back to Beijing and Guangzhou, and my family literally still have food stamp to collect food. Like,
just for people who didn't know what food stamps are, back then China had very limited food supply, so they have to really ration for everybody. Yep. Every family gets an allocated amount you're allowed to buy and use these stamps to purchase food items.
And my aunt at the time probably making $40 US per month.
A month, right.
And I said that because a lot of the founders I meet now, sort of in their 30s, they remember those days. Before I joined 500 Startup, I was working on Dolphin Browser, and the founder, Yongzhi, he told me that they were so poor that in his mind it's not just about making money, is like they don't have a choice. Like they work really, really hard, 7 days a week. And if you go to China, people wanted to make things happen no matter what. And compared, I felt like I was really, really lucky. I think when I was growing up, like, our family was doing pretty okay, and I don't have to worry about the most basic things like food. Great education system. So I think just the new generation of Chinese founders, compared to the Hong Kong founders I meet, I think it's sort of missing that fire, like to make things happen.
They don't have the drive.
That's right. And on a different note, I think Hong Kong, we were really, really lucky, right? Early on, even like 20, 30 years ago, we have great infrastructure. I think, we're a financial hub, right? So there's a lot of banking system that was built many years ago. And China didn't have anything. Just to start, you and I were complaining about why do we still need to pay physical currency in a taxi in Hong Kong.
We were talking about China has become a cashless economy. With WeChat payment, with Alipay, you really do not need cash at all. When I come here, I try to pay with an octopus card to taxi driver. They looked like they wanted to kill me. I only want cash, nothing else.
On the reverse, like 20, 30 years ago, this system didn't exist in China. So in many ways, China leapfrogged Hong Kong in the last 5 years. last 2 years, 3 years ago, they didn't really have any of these, right? So
That's right.
I think Hong Kong have a lot of catching up to do.
You're absolutely right. One thing that I hear very often from entrepreneurs or young people in Hong Kong, they're telling me that Hong Kong's real estate is way too expensive. It chokes entrepreneurs here, and nobody wants to come to the city because their startup cost will be astronomical given how expensive it is to rent an office or rent human resources here in Hong Kong. And then also I heard a very interesting saying. If you look at the richest people, the list in China and in Hong Kong. In China, usually they have a few trades. They are relatively young. I think the average age of the top richest people in China are around the age of 45, and they're overwhelmingly in the tech sector. And if you look at the same thing here in Hong Kong, they're all over the age of 65, and they're exclusively in the real estate industry. One thing I heard from the US is that if a country's richest people all from building houses, then a country or a city's economy has no future. I don't know whether you agree with this concept, but I know that another city is facing with rising real estate costs. It's Shanghai. So my next question is to Mr. Wu. What do you think about the rising real estate costs? How that's going to affect a city's competitiveness?
好，非常感谢。我不太经常说英文，所以我说中文了。我觉得您刚刚
Thank you
问
very
的问题
much.
非常重要。
I will answer in
在中
Chinese.
国是一
I
个非
think
常
this
大
question
的
is
国家，
very
我们有
important
很多的
because
城市。
China
这
is
些
a
年
large
比较引人注目
country
的
and we
创
have
业
so
城市，
many
包括深圳，
cities.
包括
In
杭
the
州，
over the
以
past
及包
few
括
years,
今
there are
天的
few
成都。
cities
当然
focused
在
in
北京也相当有
entrepreneurship.
活力，但是
For
过去从
example,
来没有人把
Shenzhen,
上海当做一个比较
Shenzhen,
有创新
Chengdu,
活力
and Hangzhou.
对 startup 公
But
司来说是一
for
个
the
好的
past
地
few
方。
years,
主要的
not
原因
many
也是
people
您刚才
think
提到
that
的这个
Shanghai
房地产价格、
is
生活成
a
本比较
hot
高的这样
city
一
for
个
entrepreneurship.
问题。
The
那
main
么
reason
首
is
先一
what
点，
you
我觉
have
得这个房地
mentioned
产价
about
格的
the
问题
high
不会
property
是一个
price.
长久
Yeah.
的
For
问题。
me, I think
第二个
the
呢，我认为这
problem
个
of the high property price
不同的
won't
创
be
业者
a
在不同的阶
long-term
段都会选
problem
择不同的地点。
because
也许我
for
们今天
startup
在座，我
companies
今天到这
at
里来
different
2年的时
stages,
间
they
里，我
will
看了这
choose
里的
different
很多
locations.
初始的项目，
I
可能对于
came
最
to
早
Hong
期的
Kong for 2
创业项
days.
目来讲，
I
上
can
海这样
see
的
that
城市不是最理想的
there
选择。
are
你可
in
能会
Hong
面
Kong,
临比较
Shanghai may
窘
not
迫的
be
一
the
个
ideal
一
city
个境地。
to
但
start
是呢，对于你
the
持
very
续的
very
长
early
期的发展来
stage
说，
of
你
startup
避免
companies.
不了要跟
But
上海这
for
样的，要跟香港这
sustainable
样的金
long-term
融城市
development,
和庞大
you
人口
can't
基数的应
avoid
用场景
that you
发生
need
密切的
the
关系。在这种
relationship
时候呢，你
in a city
做的
like
任
Hong
何一个
Kong
商
and
业的模
Shanghai,
式
which is
或者
an
任何的一种
international
应用，
financial
你
hub.
不可能脱离
So
它
for
所要面
any
对的消费者，
development,
他
any
要这个
product,
使用你这
they
个应用的
must
这个客户。
target
如果说你离
the
开了这样一个
customers,
实践的
their
场所，
target
那你的
customer.
这样一个
If
创
they
业，我觉得不会有
left
长期的一个发展的前景。
locations
事实上，
that
在
they
过去几
can
年当
reach
中，
to their
上
target
海这边
customers, then
有一
they
些
might not have a long-term
我认为也是走
development
出了一些不错
potential.
的
I
利用互
think
联网技术
that
发展起来的
China
公司。但
has
是呢，他们都
started
不是一个
in
startup 的公司，
Shanghai
他
has
们都是
started a
发展
few
到中间阶
internet
段，或
companies,
者说进一步
but
向
they
上市公司
didn't
发展的这种阶
came
段
to
当中，他
Shanghai
们
when
自
they
然而
were
然的
the
选
first
择，比
stage
如从
of
杭州到
startup.
了上海，或者
For
从深
example,
圳到
they
了
might
上海。
have
上
started
海是他们不可
in
或缺的一个
Hangzhou
战点。
or
所以我觉
Shanghai
得
or
我们不能简单
Shenzhen,
的
but
把
then in the
我们
middle
这
age,
个
in
一
the
个创
middle
业
part of their
一辈子固定在
developments,
某一
they
个地点
move
和
to
城市上。
Shanghai
可能今
to
天大家
reach
的
the
创业都
vast
想
majority
象
of
的
their
是
target
覆盖
potentials.
整个一个中国
So
或者覆盖
a
全
lot
世
of
界的
the
这样一个
startup
想法。
companies,
那么在
they
这种
will
想法的指
start
导之
with
下，
the
你必须
thought of
放
going
开眼界
national or going
去把你
global.
的这个
So
商业的模型
having
当
this
中的
thought,
各
they
种
must
参数
open
都
their
变成是
mind,
可
they
调
must
节的。
open their
然后呢，在不同的
vision
地区、不
to
同的市
see
场上采
further
取不同的
and to
策略。
test
我的
to
感觉是这
different
样。
regions,
I
different
have a
markets,
follow-up
and
question
to
for you.
adapt
Because
to
you talk
different
about a lot of
markets.
entrepreneurs when they first started, they're thinking, you know what, I'm aiming for the world. I need to cover the entire world. But another big group of Chinese entrepreneurs, one of the very common, I don't want to call it mistakes, but one of the very common thinkings they have is that 我只需要赶到 B 轮，我拿到 B 轮投资，
They
我就可以
just
cash
need to
out.
have the
What it means is
B
that I just
round
need
of
to
the
get my C
funding.
round investment, and after that, I am out. This is my opportunity to make a couple $1 million, and this is it. I'm going to sell my company to someone else, and it's someone else's problem. This is actually, unfortunately, a very common thinking among the new generation of Chinese entrepreneurs. All they were thinking is that even I take it to initial public offering, then, oh my God, it's my time to make money. There seems to be a fundamental lacking of passion, a long-term vision for a company. How do you deal with that kind of problem for a lot of new entrepreneurs? Just want to be in the market for a quick buck.
当然，我个人非常反感这样的一种
For
想法
me,
和做法。
I disagree this kind of thought, but actually in the market, many companies have this thought and strategically plan this
参
way.
加这个会是第一次，但是
Before,
我一点感受是，这非常
I
像
just told Tracy
2
about
年之前或者
my
3年之前的
feelings
中国大陆，我看到的
about 2 to 3 years ago
感
in
受
a lot of
大家都
startup
抱着一些很
conventions.
简单的、很单纯的想法
People were
以及自己一个小小
bringing
的这个设计
a
来
small
到这里跟大家
their
交流，
small
看未来能走多
design
远。
or
那
their
么我觉
pure
得
concept
关键的一点
to
是
this
你要
type
把
of
你做
startup
的
convention
这个
to
业务和
exchange
商
their
业模型
ideas. So
以一
most
个非常长远的
importantly,
计划来
I
做。
think
如果说
that
你
you
打算
have
是
to have a
走一段
long-term vision.
就
If you
拿到投
only
资以后
think
我就退出了。
for
在我
exit
个人的看法
after
呢，我
getting
认为这
some
个和
rounds
骗
of
子比较
funding,
相像。
in my opinion, this is more like
If there's
a
any
fraud
of you
or
going to pitch us,
liars.
and the first thing you're going to talk about when are you going to cash out, you may as well don't pitch.
Yeah.
And even that's what you're thinking, you shouldn't even talk about it, because I think at least like for me, for early stage, like I want to be able to see at least like 100x return rate. If you all you're thinking about you're going to exit by B, you really we're not saying that there wouldn't be other investors going to be investing, but it's just not going to be me.
That's right. Edith, I have another question for you is that we see that China has a few very successful tech giants. We also have a slew of new companies that are considered super successful and have multi-billion-dollar valuations. This problem is also facing Silicon Valley. People having this debate saying that whether there is another tech bubble forming after what happened in the late 90s, we're perhaps seeing a lot of companies that don't really have the ability to turn their model into a successful money-making machine. We all know what happened to Snapchat's shares for the past couple of days. Maybe companies like that, despite having multi-billion-dollar valuations, it hasn't really figured out a way to turn that valuation into real cash flow. As an investor, how do you guys see that kind of potential? Am I chasing the craze of investing in a company, whether it's in a share economy, whether it's one of those hot areas, now has a really high valuation but doesn't really have a viable future? Edith, let's start with you.
I think in general, China valuation is definitely at least 30-40% higher than Silicon Valley. But having said that, I actually really like Shanghai. I have 3 companies in Shanghai and do a lot of pitching. So Agora, which is real-time communication as a service.
I know it's the voice recognition, right? I just talked about Agora on my show the other day.
Oh, no way. Awesome.
You want it.
So start with, Zhao Bin, who's the former CTO of YY.
Right.
He has really, really strong background. Like the technology itself could apply to the world.
Online gaming,
Right.
all tied into that.
Right. And in this case, I'm excited for him because they're already doing really well in China. And now thinking about going to US, going to Southeast Asia or India, and they're doing well. So with things like this, let's say it's not my place to say what the valuation is, but in this case, they have real revenue to back up.
Right.
Right. So going back to valuation being crazy, I think depends. I know Mr. Wu actually invested in VR and Jaunt, in which he can talk a little bit about that. But if I'm looking at the deal, which is like B2C. And you have to back up with what's your install base, what's your ARPU, what's your monthly active, daily active. There's all number to back up, right? It's not like VR, which is a little bit different, brand new platform you're investing for the future. Or let's say with Agora, for example, which is SaaS model, and there's real revenue to back up. So, and there's comparable, where I can look at the previous, one of our investment in the US is called Twilio, public company that went public last year. And we can sort of look at that growth and do that comparison to sort of like go back to the founders, like don't be so crazy.
Yeah. That's right. What about you, Mr. Wu?
我就最简单的一个说法吧，就是
For me,
我
to
觉得考虑
simplify,
cash out 这件事情，
I think mostly these are the concerns for the investors, not the concern for the startup companies. As an investor, we have to consider which point to enter and which point target to exit. Yeah. So for me, we are a media and entertainment investment company. I will consider more their nature of the business, how much they will help me. Yeah. So ultimately, as a startup founder, you have to have your vision. Yeah. You have to create value for your customers, for your users, and this is the fundamental value that you need to follow.
A few minutes. Do we have a few minutes for Q&A? Okay, I guess we're out of time. Thank you very much for listening to our panel discussion. And I think this is a very popular model these days. Tech companies want to have this dual headquartered model where they have a headquarter in Beijing, headquarter in Silicon Valley. Hopefully that model will bring a lot of information and talents together to create something great. Thank you so much, panel.
Tracy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.